All right, so last week, I guess I'll start with our tech update. So since we're doing this show now through internet for the time being, see, we had a slightly weird week last week where I was in a closet. So I sounded weird because I was in a closet. And I did a little noise reduction stuff on your side, so you just sounded kind of swimmy, like you're swimming through outer space a little bit. But again, I think that's one nice thing is we don't have the hugest listenership, but I feel like people are used to our weird sound problems at this point. So I think people will stick with us. I think it's all right. But we're trying some different stuff to see how it goes this week. And this week, because we watched Police Squad last week, it turns out that Police Squad is extremely based on this show from 1957, this Lee Marvin show called M Squad. Like so much so that they just stole the whole plot, basically, from what I understand, and just added jokes. So I thought that this week we would just watch the M Squad that none of us had heard of before. And I've got some details here I'll go over about the show. But just the most basic one is I looked all over the place for what does M Squad mean? And I could not find a single stitch of information about why it's called M Squad.
Modern Squad? I know Mod Squad later.
Maybe it'll say in the episode. I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, maybe. Mod Squad was because they were so hip.
Well, I guess even them, yeah. What was the Mod Squad? Was it like the mod movement?
Oh, they were modern, just modern and hip and cool and...
Right. Well, I think it's safe to say that the crime procedural with Lee Marvin in it from 1957 is not because he was hip. I have no idea. There's not a ton of information about this show. If you search it, it comes up as like one of the best shows about Chicago that you haven't seen is what the article was called, like just kind of insinuating that everybody forgot this show. So we're going to watch an episode from season 2 and just hopefully maybe they'll bring it up. I couldn't find like the very first episode where maybe they would explain. There has to be a reason, but I have no idea.
Maybe it's if they all deal with murder. Maybe it's Murder Squad.
Yeah, maybe they couldn't say that on TV back then. Just got to call it M Squad.
And is it one of I'm wondering, is it Lee Marvin's introduction to the film world? Did he start there and then move into movies?
Well, let me tell you, actually, I guess, because I have very little info about this, so I'll just rattle it off right here. M Squad is an American crime drama television series, ran from 57 to 1960 on NBC, 3 seasons with 117 episodes. It's set in Chicago, Illinois, and the show starred Marvin as Detective Lieutenant Frank Ballinger, a member of M Squad, a special unit of the Chicago Police assisting other units in battling organized crime, corruption, and violent crime citywide. And although Marvin had been appearing in feature films since 1951, it was this series that made him a star, and he later went on to an even bigger film career afterward. So, even though this show seems a little bit forgotten, it's weird. It's like usually people think of television as a bit of a demotion. Like, you want to go to movies to be a big-time star. But he went back down to TV. This show made him kind of a household name, and then he went back to movies. So this was his fulcrum point of his career.
Well, that's interesting. That's, because you think of him, I always think of Lee Marvin as a movie star in movies, although I think I do remember seeing him as a B actor in some early Westerns.
Yeah, I was thinking it's funny that I just know the name Lee Marvin without thinking about it. It was just like, oh, Lee Marvin. So this caused me to think about it a little bit. I was like, now why in heck's name do I know Lee Marvin? Why? Because I can't think of anything I've ever seen him in, but I absolutely know Lee Marvin. And you're not going to be shocked to learn why I know Lee Marvin.
Oh, yes, of course.
There was a bit of a clue where... where I had you download before we started recording. I was like, okay, here's what we're going to watch this week. So there's a couple of M Squad videos and mysteriously a Simpsons clip. So let's take a quick break and watch that Simpsons clip because I'll just give you the setup. It's Homer went to rent a movie and him and Bart want a violent Western and Lisa and Marge would prefer not. So he rents this Lee Marvin Western called Paint Your Wagon, which is actually a real movie that is a Western musical. But I looked up a clip from it, and it's like very serious and just like, I've been living life hard all these years, that type of, it's like a musical, but very like serious and stuff. So the Simpsons version of Paint Your Wagon is not like that. But yeah, if you want to go open that file on your computer.
Sure.
And just watch this is why I know Lee Marvin. But like me and everybody in the neighborhood, to us, like we're like, oh yeah, Lee Marvin, that guy's awesome. But the only reference point we have is this Simpsons clip.
Here comes Lee Marvin. Thank God. He's always drunk and violent.
What the hell is going on in my town?
We're just painting this wagon. You got a problem with that?
As a matter of fact, I do. You missed a spot.
Well, grab a brush and join in.
Gonna paint your wagon, gonna paint it fine. Gonna use oil-based paint, cause the wood is pine.
Under rows of pine.
Who knew that Lee Marvin could do such marvelous splits? He's dreamy.
And definitely, I mean, to me, the best part of that whole thing is, and again, I didn't really know who Lee Marvin was, but you can really just tell from context clues. He's an old-timey Western guy, gruff and gravelly and stuff. So when Lisa goes, he's dreamy, it's like I love that too, because again, I mean, it's come up many times, but how The Simpsons is like a kaleidoscope. Like I have a lot more knowledge of just pop culture from the generation that came before me than I should have because of The Simpsons. And even that one, where I knew Clint Eastwood, obviously, I didn't really know Lee Marvin, but now I'm going to catch up on my Lee Marvin. That third guy, he's obviously somebody famous also, but that's like...
Oh, that's Lee Van Cleef.
Yeah, because I was going to say, that's the waiting in the wings now. It's like, I'm sure eventually I'll watch something with him in it, and it'll be the exact same thing. I'll be like, say, I know that guy from Paint Your Wagon.
Lee Van Cleef is in a lot of stuff, and his claim to fame probably was, I think I saw him around before, but I remember him from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Very, very famous actor, and one of those character type actors that whenever you see him, you know who he is.
Yeah, that is actually a movie that has been on my list, where to go through like the sort of history of Westerns. I did my like John Ford stuff, but his movies, like there's a lot to like about them, but they are really long and really slow. So I took a few years off from Westerns before I got to the Clint Eastwood era. So yeah, I haven't really seen those movies yet, but I'm sure I will at some point.
Well, those are what are known as the spaghetti westerns. They were done in Italy. There's three of them: The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I don't remember all their names, but there's three of them. And the most famous one is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
But I think the thing that my generation knows the most from those, we kind of vaguely know about them, but it's the Sergio Leone music. That stuff is still super famous.
Yeah. Anyway, that was excellent.
One thing that's also just funny about The Simpsons is I didn't know until yesterday, till I was looking this up, that Paint Your Wagon is a real movie. I just assumed it was just Simpsons. Well, I mean, I don't know. That's what kind of was genius about old school Simpsons is if you get the references, then, people who know the movie Paint Your Wagon, to them it would be funny because, it's such a serious, dour film. It is a musical, but it's very serious, and it's not about, well, grab a brush, partner. It's nothing like that. But even as a kid, when I saw that, and the only context I had was I knew Clint Eastwood. So I didn't know Lee Van Cleef. I didn't know Lee Marvin. I didn't know Paint Your Wagon was a real movie. And it's still really funny, that's what was so good about that show. But yeah, I'm shocked to learn, why was it called Paint Your Wagon? And I assume that's the same thing the Simpsons writers probably thought is like not a very cool name for a very serious Western. So why don't we do our version where it's literally, because the guys in our neighborhood, not to turn this into a Simpsons podcast, but when I was growing up, like we would almost talk in Simpsons, just talk with code words from the Simpsons that we all knew. So I mean, I can't even think of the number of times I've said some variation of gonna use oil-based paint because the wood is prime. you know? And,
Isn't it amazing as you got older to realize that most of those references that The Simpsons dealt with were based on other things that happened in the past? People, movies, TV shows, famous people, not famous people. It's incredible. When I watch those shows, I can't believe the references. They just keep coming at you, one right after the other. And a little bit of research, you find out that they really are real. They really are based on something that already happened.
yeah, and it really is like that's like the secret sauce to it is it makes more sense in hindsight that these things are not just weird non sequiturs and that didn't just come out of nowhere, but just that they were able to make these references work on both levels. That's where it was, again, we'll get off The Simpsons after this, but it was such a bummer at the time that, I mean, it happens over and over. After this, it was Beavis and Butthead, and then it was Jackass and whatever, but it's always that show, like, oh, you're not supposed to watch that. This is bad for kids. But with The Simpsons in particular, if parents had actually watched The Simpsons instead of just being like, oh no, Bart Simpson said hell and damn, and he bitch. If they had actually watched it, they would have fucking loved that show. But, it's not how the outraged moral majority functions.
Okay, now off with The Simpsons. Let's move on.
Yeah, so paint your wagon. So M Squad. So the deal here is that we watched the first episode last week of Police Squad, and I saw written down that it was so closely based on season 2, episode 1 of M Squad that they literally took dialogue and actual scenes from M Squad, and then they just had Leslie Nielsen act like a dickhead over top of it. Man, I went and rewatched some of that stuff too in that first episode. I think the best thing about that we didn't bring up last week, but do you remember that part where, again, it's probably just a line from M Squad, where the lady's like, oh, you don't know what it's like to be married to a man for 14 years. And Leslie Nielsen goes off on his whole own weird soliloquy where he's like, no, that's true. Did live with a man for 2 years. Yeah. And gets into all the trials and tribulations of living with this guy. And that was weird enough. All these strange, like potentially homosexual undertones. But then it got even weirder where he's like, yeah, he moved on, got a wife, didn't care for her, had a son. I lived with him too, but wasn't the same. You can never go back. It's like, what in the hell is going on here? Like, what a good show. So, I mean, it's going to be a significantly different experience this week because this is going to be the serious version. This is the version of that without the jokes. So we'll see how this goes. But I also wanted to mention, so most of the time when we watch these shows and I say like, hey, if you want to, listen along at home or whatever, like here's the episode. So in this case, it is season 2, episode 1. It's called More Deadly. And I would just leave it up to people to like, hey, go find it on your own. Old TV shows, they're around, but you got to dig it up. But to go like a little bit behind the scenes of like how I find stuff for this show, it's interesting because you can gauge how well remembered a show is by how easy it is to find sometimes. Like, I think one of our most popular episodes is the Gilligan's Island pilot, and it wasn't very hard to find. But also sometimes people are like, hey, I wish you would upload the actual thing so I could see it. But I can't do that because Gilligan's Island is still famous and they're still trying to sell it to people. If you try to upload that to YouTube, you'll immediately get a copyright strike and your channel will get in trouble because you're not supposed to just upload TV shows to YouTube. So I just am like, sorry, you're on your own. However, M Squad was so hard to find that like you can just tell this is forgotten. Like just nobody cares about M Squad. No one minds what is happening with this show at all. Where the way I got it is there's this old program called SoulSeek that back in the day with like Napster in the early 2000s, it was this thing so you could steal music. Like file sharing, trading with each other, but it was piracy. You were just stealing music. Nowadays, there's no need for that because Spotify has every song ever. They just upload songs to YouTube. You don't have to steal music anymore, but these programs still exist. And that's one of my tricks for finding obscure stuff is I realized at some point SoulSeek's still around. People still use it, and if they have videos on their computer with their music, you can also share those. So if I just search for some weird thing, in this case M Squad, maybe someone will have it. And in this case, one person had this episode, and I was the 8,000th file in the queue. Like, I had to leave it on all night because this guy was sharing 8,000 other things before I could get my copy of M Squad. I was like, am I ever going to get this? But I left it on all night, and it went through, and I did download it. And then when I got it, it was terrible quality. The whole file was like 100 megs. The visuals were terrible. So what I did is I boosted the sound up to make it louder. I fixed the contrast so the video doesn't look as bad. And I uploaded it to YouTube because I'm like, there's no way I'm going to get in trouble for this. Nobody cares about this show. And if I say, like, hey, go find a copy, you're not going to be able to find a copy. I barely found a copy. No one out there is going to be able to watch this if I didn't take things into my own hands. So if you want to watch this episode, it's not on this YouTube channel, but I have another YouTube channel called Keith's Drawer. It's my junk drawer where I just upload random stuff. So if you search M Squad S2E1 for Season 2, Episode 1, More Deadly, just any of that stuff, it'll come up. And it's already got some views, and people started commenting on it. Just like now I've given M Squad back to the internet. So in this one and only case, if you want to watch M Squad, I did upload it because, man, this felt like I was traveling to another dimension to get this thing. It was so almost gone.
Isn't that great when you can find something like that? And then instead of just saying, oh, well, I can't be bothered, we'll just let that go into the netherwood. Yeah, you uploaded it. So now it's out there. So let's see if it's any good.
Yeah, and apparently, I mean, they did put it out on DVD in 2008, and I think even more recently. A set came out in 2014. So, I mean, it's sort of available. You could probably find those on eBay or something. But yeah, digitally speaking, and I don't know where this copy I had came from because it looked so bad. But yeah, I've spruced it up a little. It doesn't look so bad. But I'm glad I could find this one episode because obviously with the Naked Gun connection, this is the one. We got to watch this episode. I would have watched another one if I had to. But
absolutely.
Because the only other one I could find that was on YouTube, let me see. It is Season 2, Episode 37, which I'm sure is a fine episode in its own right. But yeah, I wanted More Deadly. So yeah, let's throw this thing on and see how it relates to Police Squad.
All right, here we go.
All right, I just can't cover up for you anymore. I'm in this thing way too deep already.
Oh, not as deep as I am. Oh, honey, please. My bookie's getting anxious. He wants his money.
Laura Kane had killed 2 men to hide a $1,500 theft. To hide murder, she had tried to kill me. And for all her efforts, she ended up in the death house at Stateville Prison. But at least I'd cleared the names of 2 dead men. And Ralph Halper's little girl would grow up in my town knowing that her father had always been a good man.
Well, I thought it was quite good. It had quite a bit of extra stuff in it that the Police Squad one didn't. Like the shooting Lee Marvin at the end, and him taking her out to dinner, the policewoman going to the apartment so that later she could root around and find the gun. And it had that kind of slick ending that was totally unexpected, like quite a little twist there that the audience would never be able to figure that out.
Yeah, I guess Police Squad had to kind of pick what it was going to spend its time on, and instead it had like the endless wigs. Remember I mentioned, I was like, man, that lady's bouffante's really big, and then it's because they took like 8 different wigs off of her.
That's true. Yes, true.
Yeah, going to the apartment stuff. Instead, they had the 24-hour wicker store, which there was nothing really. That was their idea. That wasn't really from M Squad, but.
And they did things that made the killer at the end so obvious, like when she went down to the police station to identify the fella. In this show, she's dressed up, but she's normally dressed. In the Police Squad one, she shows up in some fur coat and obviously had big money to spend. Whereas in this one, that wasn't given away at all. They had no proof that she had actually stolen that money, Whereas in Police Squad, it was so obvious that she'd taken it because she was spending money like hand over fist.
Yeah, it's kind of unfair, I guess, really, because obviously Police Squad wouldn't exist without this, but it is hard to go back, because everything kept reminding me of Police Squad.
Me too. I kept waiting for the next line, the next little joke to come out. It's almost like you would have had to watch M Squad first to get the serious nature of it, and then watch Police Squad, because it was very hard to look at M Squad and get any kind of seriousness out of it, because you were always waiting for the next the shoe to drop with some joke.
Yeah, it's very much like, it's the same example I used last week, but it really is true, is how I watched Spaceballs a bunch when I was a kid, and then I saw Star Wars as an adult. And obviously all the real ideas came from Star Wars, all the cool ships, Darth Vader, lightsabers. But to me, I was like, this is lame. Where's the jokes? Which is like, and this is similar. It's like M Squad actually came up with all this stuff, but it feels kind of empty and is a little thin. It's like weird because it's, the ones that really stood out to me were, the whole plot, I guess, was the same. Like the opening scene was exactly the same pretty much, but it's such a weird plot. This lady is just gunning people down and just thinking she's going to get away with it. Like maybe that's partially what inspired the Police Squad guys, is like, do you remember how wild some of those plots were? Like that was a bit ridiculous. So why not make it extra ridiculous? And even just that part where they're talking to the lady is like what I brought up earlier of like, you don't know what it's like to live with a man for 14 years. It's like, I can't take that seriously anymore. That has been ruined by Leslie Nielsen.
But it was cute. It was a good show.
Yeah, and it's funny too to see, my knowledge of Lee Marvin is not only older Lee Marvin with the big beard and the big mustache, but also a cartoon of him. But it's really interesting to see this guy, and it's like, oh yeah, you take that cartoon, you give him a shave, you make him 10 years younger. That's Lee Marvin, all right. That's the guy.
So you have another one, don't you?
I do have another one. Do you want to watch another M Squad?
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to compare one that you could watch without always waiting for a joke to come out of it.
All right, so yeah, we'll watch another. This is the other episode that was on YouTube. It's season 2, episode 37, Decoy and White. So yeah, this could be good to get a sense of M Squad without it being corrupted by Police Squad. But before we watch that, one last thing to get the Police Squad out of our system is somebody on YouTube did a side-by-side comparison. So if anybody wants to watch this, it's called M Squad and Police Squad side-by-side comparison, and the YouTube channel is Tommy Westfall's Snow Globe 164. But yeah, if you just type M Squad, Police Squad side-by-side, it'll come up. So let's watch this first, because he just basically took all the scenes from each show side by side, so you can see exactly how identical they are. It's kind of funny. So we'll watch that, and then we'll watch the real M Squad episode after.
Sally, I just can't cover up for you anymore. I'm in this thing way too deep already.
As deep as I am. Oh, honey, please. My bookie's getting anxious. He wants his money.
Tell me you haven't got it. What can he do?
Tell him you haven't got it.
What can he do? He beat up his own mother when it comes to money. Look, Jimmy, you've got to go along with me, or I'm in serious trouble. I'm sorry.
So yeah, I think that probably was a good idea, just to give that show a little room to breathe on its own without without all the jokes.
It was not a bad show, but it certainly wrapped up fast.
Yeah, and that one, it did, it was obviously a different plot, but it did, it felt similar. I mean, you can kind of feel the vibe of what the show was. It does seem like every week it was probably relatively similar, because that was still just kind of in some kind of a businessy setting, some kind of crime happens. I was across town and went there, and, that was the kind of the formula.
Yeah. But it was different than the first show. The first show had that twist that you would not have expected. This one just kind of, you knew who the crooks were, and it had a climactic ending. But then they had the fight, and then, oh, well, that's all over. And then they finished it off with a narrative to give the conclusion rather than give you action on it. That's a little unusual.
I did notice, too, that this is one thing that is, I guess, just a thing of the era that doesn't really happen anymore, is that this is season 2, episode 37. You know, like we have, I mean, British shows do like 6 episodes a year. Nowadays, TV shows do, and ever since I've been around on the earth, you know, usually 20-some episodes. 37 episodes, that's a lot of episodes. Like, that's nearing soap opera levels of, like, let's just pump these out. So, yeah, it probably is one of those things that even though it's clearly an okay show, but I'm sure it's not like each episode is some finely crafted gem like a BBC show or something. They're clearly just kind of like, let's get a bunch of M squads on TV.
Well, yeah, because you figure, I don't know how many shows they would have produced in that second season, but 37 shows would be, and there's only 52 weeks in the year. Like, there's very few weeks left to do almost, like, that's 3/4 of a year that they've been producing.
Yeah, let me do a quick check because I believe, there were 38 episodes, then 40, then 39. So each season had almost 40. So yeah, that is a whack of shows.
Wow.
You can also see, too, kind of what probably made this show stick in the Zuckers and Abraham's mind a little, because obviously it was decades later that they made Police Squad. But I bet when they did remember this from when they were kids, like, it does seem a bit like a good thing to take some starch out of that stuffed shirt, like it is. Because what made me think of it is the part in this episode where Lee Marvin's character was like, this criminal that we're checking out, he was in a karate class, and I learned some karate when I was in the military. And then once he gets there and starts interrogating the guy, he didn't just learn a little karate. He knows the whole history of karate. He knows how to identify karate practitioners from just the way their hands look. And he's like, oh, you must be a little new to karate, And it reminded me of Cannon, how Cannon is, a super genius who knows 7 languages and all this stuff. And it is this archetype that is just like, this guy is the best. This guy knows everything. He's a genius. You're never going to beat this guy. So it is like a perfect target to have Leslie Nielsen be the guy now who still talks the same way, delivers lines the same way, but is just a moron. Like it does make sense that it's a good target. It's a pretty good show, but it's also an especially good target for parody.
But the formula would have been, you had to have the formula that runs through the vein of all these shows is you have to have somebody who's a little special. He just can't be the average guy off the street because he's got to have a little insight, more knowledge, because he's the guy who's going to solve the crime. You just can't have Joe Q. Public on the street being able to do that. You could have somebody a little special. And most of those shows that you watched that were produced in the 1950s and in the 1960s even, there was something special, whether it was a doctor show or a Western show or a crime show, police show. The main character is somebody who's not just your average run-of-the-mill guy. He's got some special ability that allows him to solve the crime. I think you got a difference when you had Columbo come along, who he also has that special innate ability to solve crime, but he comes across as very laid back, almost idiotic. As opposed, these guys are not idiotic. They are serious contenders for this position.
Yeah, it's one of those things I think nowadays even you might be able to get away with a show that is about like a guy who is just solving these crimes by just barely, like really struggling, really having a hard time and managing to figure it out. Like he is just an average guy who's really in over his head. But it is one of those things like as you go through history, the history of media, before you can go against type like that, you need to establish the type. And yeah, obviously in 1957, 1958, they were not at all ready for the reverse archetype yet. They were plenty happy with this archetype. Because I remember the example I always think of, even when I was a teenager, it was my friend Mark. He was the first guy I ever heard express the opinion that he didn't like Batman because Batman just solves every crime, and he didn't like James Bond because James Bond just like never fails. And I remember we argued a little at first, like me and his brother and stuff were just like, yeah, but that's why they're so cool. But as I think back to that years later, I'm like, man, he was right.
Yeah.
Because like, yeah, that's boring. But back then it wasn't boring yet. It was still, that's just how it was done.
And it's not even like a 50s and 60s thing, because this is the same special traits that these guys have that were the Sherlock Holmes of 70 or 80 years before that. The Hercule Poirot of all of those people have this special ability to see through the chaff and get to the root of the crime and then solve the crime. The average Joe on the street, sorry, we just don't have that ability, or we're not supposed to.
I guess the middle ground is now we have a little bit more of like the idea that the detective is a genius detective because he's got like autism and he can super focus, ADHD, like he has problems, but the problems still cause him to be a genius. So yeah, maybe if I was a producer, that's the next step. My show would just be this guy, there's how there's a bottom of every class? There's always the guy who was the worst surgeon who's still graduated. Like you could do a show about the guy he's the worst detective, but he's very earnest and he really tries hard, but he really sucks. But still have him, achieve it, but it's like really tough for him.
A lot, too, of the development of crime solvers is not just one individual. Like a lot of what you see in media, TV, movies, whatever, it's a group effort. Somebody may solve the crime, but they rely on somebody else's knowledge or something they said or something they did, and that leads them forward in coming to the solution. Whereas in these earlier type shows, like the ones we just watched, it's one guy, and that one guy is the one who solves the problem. But now it's more of a group effort. You interact with other people and you learn from them and you rely on them and you send them to go investigate things, and then you come to the resolve. Whereas in this one, it's one guy and he goes out and he can bash, in this case here, one guy's a karate expert and the other guy has got a gun. Well, he's one guy against two guys, maybe against three or four guys, one guy. Whereas now you get a group effort. So that's been an evolution of this kind of movie, of this kind of show.
Yeah, it's been a while since we watched it, so I don't remember a lot of specifics about it, but it does make me think of Dragnet. Just the very term Dragnet is just the police force at large is scouring the whole city for information. So I don't know if the show itself was really about that, but at least they were bringing those kind of terms in and, yeah, acknowledging that it takes a village. It takes the whole police force, not just this one amazing genius guy. So I was thinking now we're at the slight crossroads of what to watch next week, because when we laid these out, we just were thinking of shows off the top of our heads. So I think the next one I had lined up was The Avengers, but we didn't intend to watch M Squad either. Like when you watch stuff, it just makes you think about other stuff. So even though M Squad has literally nothing to do with the Mod Squad, should we toss in an episode of the Mod Squad just because?
Sure. Let's see what it was happening 10 years later. I think Mod Squad was in the late 60s, may have been the early 70s. But yeah, approximately 10 years after M Squad. Sure, let's check it out and see if they really are cool characters.